Now, I know when you look on the board and you see that there's only 8 news bullet point that I put for this news of the week, you think that this is going to be one of those news of the week where I do on the weekends that there isn't really a lot of news to report, and that there's definitely not as much news I would report compared to the weekday edition that I do. Well, you would be surprised to find out that this is actually part 1 of the news of the week, and that for the first time in terms of the weekend edition, and for the second time in the news of the week, I am going to do kind of like 2-part news of the week, where after I finish talking about the news on this board, I'm going to switch boards and talk about the other news that happened this week, because there was a ton of news that happened this week. And I think a lot of that has to do with the European transfer window just closed a couple of days ago, and it seemed like a couple of teams don't want to wait for the new CBA to be renewed, which, speaking of the CBA, I'll talk a little bit later on this video to talk about how is the CBA going, and that whether or not if it actually if the MLS Player Association and MLS is able to reach agreement with the new CBA. But first of all, let's dive into what could be another long news of the week video by talking about Inter Miami, who was on the news for these last couple of days a lot. And I know whenever I talk about Inter Miami, and when you hear me talk about them, you would think that they'll probably once again rumor with some ridiculous amount of players that is going to be come to their team, but those rumors will literally die in a couple of days, and it never come true. Well, this week they actually did something that a lot of fans hoping that they would finally start doing, which is signing players. And that they did exactly that. And the first signings that they done this week, before I actually talk about the Wil Trapp one, which I think that's probably the biggest signing that they have done, and probably the biggest talking point of this week, I want to talk about the fact that they first signed Celtic winger Lewis Morgan, and that this is a guy that is currently with the Scottish national team. I think he's only 22 years old, so he's a very promising kind of player that I know some people will say, well, most likely he's going to be playing with the USL team. I don't think so. He is actually a player that has featured with Celtic, and anytime when you are a player that featured the biggest team in Scotland and you're a young promising player, you know that he could be a very decent player, and that I won't be surprised if he is going to be fight for starting minutes with this team, and could even be, if he doesn't fight for starting minutes, he could be a very decent depth piece for this Inter Miami team on the wing. But now let's get into probably the biggest signing of this week, and get to probably the signing that I don't think a lot of people saw this coming. And that, when you look at Inter Miami for the last couple of weeks, they always tends to have like rumors of players that they're going to get, but it never come true. But this is kind of the opposite, where nobody actually reported that Wil Trapp is going to go to Inter Miami. But on Thursday, it was officially confirmed that he was going to go to Inter Miami, and that the Columbus Crew, of course, trade Wil Trapp to Inter Miami in exchange for 100,000 general allocation money and an international spot that Columbus is going to get. Now, I know as much as everybody is surprised the fact that Wil Trapp is going to go to Inter Miami, I feel like if Columbus was going to sell Wil Trapp, they would probably sell him to a European team rather than to another in-state conference that is Inter Miami. But I think what is more surprising about this deal is the fact that they only got 100,000 GAM and an international spot out of this. And keep in mind, this is the same team that gave Lawless Abubakar on a permanent transfer for Colorado, and we said that that deal was probably going to be reach the 6-digit or the 7-digit mark, and it didn't even came close, and that Colorado only had to pay 400,000 to Columbus and an international spot. And I think this one is kind of something similar to that, but this one is even lower with the fact that Inter Miami is able to get the captain of Columbus for almost just peanuts amount of allocation money and an international spot that they have to give to Columbus. And I guess maybe the reason why Wil Trapp's stock really plummeted is the fact that he had a very mediocre season, and he is a guy that is also, I think, on his last year of his contract with Columbus. So I guess maybe Columbus, they did had a plan to sell to Wil Trapp, and that they don't want to wait until the last year where, if they're going to sell Wil Trapp to either an MLS team or go to Europe, they won't receive anything out of that because his contract runs. But that being said, it's still kind of surprised the fact that they only got peanuts amount of that, and that I would think Wil Trapp is worth more than 100,000 GAM and an international spot to get him. But this is an absolute steal for Inter Miami, and that this is another signing that it's a collection of veteran MLS player that is currently with this team. I mean, I know a lot of people have been talking about Inter Miami, and a lot of people kind of a little bit disappointed with the roster they have because it has no big name player, which is true. They haven't signed that big name player that everybody thought that David Beckham was going to go for. But one thing that they did done with their roster is that they have signed a couple of very decent veteran player in this team, and that they also have signed a couple of good MLS players that's been in this league for a while and know how it gets done. And because of that, that is maybe one of the key ingredient for them to, maybe get into the playoffs, but not really. Like, I think the only way that maybe people are saying that they could be right at the level of LAFC and Atlanta United in their inaugural year is that they can sign a big name player. But I think maybe they don't really need to sign a big name player. And as long as if these veteran MLS player that they have signed, like Wil Trapp, can perform very well for this team could be like Atlanta and LAFC in their inaugural year, and maybe could reach up to the top 4 spot of MLS in the Eastern Conference. But, having said that, in terms of big name players and the fact that it seemed like Inter Miami is rumored with every single big name player and it hasn't come true, well, they have had a report that they were going to get Rodolfo Pizarro from Rayados, and originally when I first read it, I thought this was just one of those big name kind of rumor that it's not going to come true, because after all, it was just a couple of days when Funes Mori was rumored to go to Inter Miami, and that rumor kind of died. But it seemed like that might not be the case, and that this one actually could happen, because there was actually a second report, a follow-up report, talk about how Inter Miami is actually in negotiation with Monterrey for Rodolfo Pizarro, and the report transfer fee that Inter Miami is going to pay, get this, $17 to $20 million, which I think that would be pretty close in terms of breaking the transfer record in MLS. I don't remember how much Atlanta actually paid Pity Martinez for the record amount of transfer fee that an MLS club has able to get a player, but it would be very close if Inter Miami decided to pay $17 to $20 million to try to get Rodolfo Pizarro. And it would make sense why they want to get this player, because this is a player that first the Chicago Fire tried to get him. Obviously, it didn't work out because the Fire didn't want to pay that amount of money. But it seemed like Inter Miami really want to get him because this is a guy that currently played at Rayados, and one of the former manager that he is playing under is currently the manager at Inter Miami in Diego Alonso. So this is just a Diego Alonso guy that he wants to bring from Rayados to play for his current team that he is coaching, and it will be very interesting to see whether or not if this deal would reach. And if this deal does reach, this would be the big signings that everybody was talking about. Not necessarily a big-time name that a lot of people will realize, but it is a guy that I think if he does come to MLS, he's going to have just as big of an impact of all the Liga MX players that have signed this offseason from their club in Liga MX to go to MLS. So we shall see whether or not if Rodolfo Pizarro will be the latest big star Liga MX player to go to MLS and join Inter Miami. But finally, the last news to talk about Inter Miami is that they have unveiled their new USL team name and logo, and their new USL team is actually going to be called Fort Lauderdale CF, which I guess, one, that means we can't really make any joke about how Inter Miami should be actually called Inter Fort Lauderdale because they actually play in Fort Lauderdale. And two, it kind of makes more sense that their USL team name is actually play in the city that they're going to play. Now, granted, I think Inter Miami, the reason why they're playing Fort Lauderdale is that they are waiting for that new stadium that they're going to be building near downtown Miami, and hopefully once that new stadium is built, they of course will move to there, and then the name of course would make sense. But it's kind of a little bit ironic, the fact that their lower tier team and their affiliates actually have a name that sticks to the city that they're playing in, where they're actually based, compared to Inter Miami that is based in Miami, but they're playing in Fort Lauderdale, which for those of you that don't know the distance between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, it's pretty long. 30 miles in each other. So it's a complete different city. So, it's kind of a little bit interesting. And also the logo itself, I don't have my phone right now, so I can't really show you guys the logo. It's very similar to the Inter Miami logo. I don't know. I don't really kind of see a lot of difference into it, but it makes sense why it's very similar, because usually when you have affiliates team in the USL, their logo usually are very similar to the affiliates team that is in MLS. So yeah, Inter Miami of course is able to unveil their new USL team and logo for the last couple of days. But now moving on to talk about things that is unrelated to Inter Miami, because I think I spent pretty much 12 minutes talking about what has happened with Inter Miami the last couple of days. And keep in mind, this news of the week isn't all about Inter Miami, because there's also some big news that happened besides Inter Miami, and some kind of surprising news. Although this one, I'm not quite sure. Like, depend on if you think this is surprising. But the Red Bulls, of course, sold Kemar Lawrence to Anderlecht, and the reason why I say it depend if you feel like this is surprising is because if you haven't heard the rumors that the Red Bulls have been thinking about selling Kemar Lawrence for pretty much this entire offseason, and these last couple of days is the time where they finally pulled the trigger and finally sold him to a European team. Although they only sold him to Anderlecht for $1.25 million, which, yeah, that definitely is pretty low in terms of selling one of your star left back, and probably the best left back in the league. I mean, I know left back is a position that when you decide to sell to another team for profit, you're not going to get as much profit as, let's say, if you're going to sell a striker to a European team. But still, he as I said, he is probably the best left back in the league, and you would think his value probably could be at least $3 to $4 million, not just $1.25 million that the Red Bulls got. But at least the Red Bulls got some sort of profit out of that, and now they're going to have to try to figure out how to replace him, which, yeah, that's going to be very tough to try to replace one of your star player on your team and probably the best fullback in this league. Now, Atlanta United has officially sold Tito Villalba back to Paraguay. Obviously, in the last news of the week, I talked about how Tito Villalba most likely is going to be the latest player that is going to be leaving Atlanta, and that he's going to be going back to Paraguay. And this season is going to be interesting for Atlanta, and that in some way, I don't know how this team is going to be like this season, with the way that they pretty much sold off all their play. Well, not all their player, but most of their star-studded player that won the MLS Cup in 2018. And I wonder, with them selling off so many of these pieces, and I'm assuming eventually they're going to have some replacement for some of those players that they sold, is it going to actually work out heading into this upcoming season? And that, in other words, I feel like Frank de Boer, this season is really the season where we can really maybe judge whether or not if he can do very well with Atlanta. I mean, last season, the reason why I didn't really judge him that much is because the team that he has is basically built by Tata Martino, and that was his first season in MLS, and he did quite decently. But now, heading into the second season, and especially with a club that has a lot of expectation, and you basically just got rid of a couple of players that are fan favorite, and that you're basically building your new team. And if the new team and the new players that you bring in that does not work out heading into this upcoming season, and if Atlanta does struggle, don't be surprised if Frank de Boer might be one of the first guy to be fired from this team. So yeah, I'm interested to see with Atlanta selling all these players out, who exactly they are going to bring in terms of replace them, and whether if they're going to have the same impact to the players that they sold off this offseason. The Seattle Sounders acquired Brazilian midfielder Joao Paulo as a designated player, and there is no doubt that this is a signing that they think could be the answer of replacing Ozzy Alonso. Well, I'm not going to say it's going to be the answer that Joao Paulo could have that same impact that Ozzy Alonso had when he was a member of the Sounders, but they definitely feel like this is going to be the case, and that's why they decided to give him a DP contract, and that if, from what I heard, that he is a very decent player, and he could be the guy that has going to be playing something similar to what Ozzy Alonso did in Seattle, and that he's going to be a good link-up partner with Nicolas Lodeiro. This could definitely be a good signing, and that finally Seattle is able to replace Ozzy Alonso after a couple of years, and that, we'll see if this will work out. Now, the Sounders' Cascadia rival Portland Timbers also made another signing. So after they signed that Polish striker called Nasgodo, I think that's how you pronounce his name, they also acquired another striker, and they acquired Felipe Mora from Pumas, and there's no doubt that this is just a signing for them to add in more depth in terms of the striker position. From what I heard from Pumas fans, they said that he is not that decent, but I guess the reason why the Timbers decided to get him is that he could be a guy that could be used for depth piece, and that he could maybe come off the bench and make a big impact. But, it's great to see that the Timbers, who, their biggest question this offseason has to be the striker position. Well, actually, besides Valeri and whether or not if he's going to return with the Timbers, their biggest question, no doubt, is the striker position, because they only have like one striker, and who exactly is going to replace Brian Fernandez in that role? Well, we already saw Nescano is going to be coming into this team as a DP, and now they also had pretty much the backup to their main striker and the backup of Nescano by signing Felipe Mora from Pumas. But that being said, I am now going to switch boards and talk about the last couple of news that happened in these last couple of days. Now, former Seattle Sounder defender Brad Smith is rumored to go on loan with Cardiff City. And this is kind of interesting because for the Seattle Sounders, this offseason they decided to let go of Brad Smith and decided to not sign him on a permanent deal after his loan expired of him at the Sounders, and that he's now going back to Bournemouth. Well, now he's actually going to be going on loan with Cardiff. And by the time he finishes loan at Cardiff, his contract is actually going to be expired. And I'm wondering, did the Seattle Sounder actually think that, as much as we want to re-sign Brad Smith on a permanent deal, we are actually going to kind of do this 4D chess move by just giving it back to Bournemouth, knowing the fact that he has only 1 year left in this deal, and that now he's going to be potentially going on loan at Cardiff. But by the end of his loan at Cardiff, if Bournemouth decided to not renew his contract, then we're basically just going to get him back, and that we basically don't even have to pay any transfer fee and only have to pay his salary. Now, the problem with this kind of thinking is that Cardiff could potentially come in and say that they really like Brad Smith when he was on loan with the team, and that they can basically sign him on a free too if Bournemouth decided to not renew Brad Smith's contract. And then the other issue with this is if Bournemouth decided to sign Brad Smith to a new contract, then Seattle will have to pay a transfer fee either way to get Brad Smith back to their team. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that could be a very smart move, and that, at least the Sounders, of course, might be thinking of that as a way to try to get one of their star-studded player back in their fold. I mean, there was no doubt that there was a very difficult decision that they had to make in terms of whether or not if they're going to keep Brad Smith and make him a permanent transfer, because he was such an impact player in that back four. But it feels like maybe they're kind of thinking outside of the box, and they're trying to think a way that they might not even have to pay that transfer fee and to make him a permanent transfer, and maybe in a year they're just going to force Bournemouth and kind of force them in the hand of the fact that if you do not decided to re-sign Brad Smith on a new contract, we are going to come scooping in, and we're just going to get him on a free transfer. So, yeah, we'll see how that can play out heading into the end of the season, and whether or not if that is going to be the case. But moving on, another former MLS player, and this is actually the former Minnesota United goalkeeper Vita Monona, has been loaned to Ishcek, I think that's how you pronounce FB, in the Danish Superliga. Now, as much as I loved Vita Monona when he was at Minnesota, and that I was kind of sad the fact that we couldn't reach on a permanent transfer when we, of course, got him on loan with this club last season. The reason why we had to let him go is because he basically just offered something that, if you're a goalkeeper and you ask your club to give you a DP contract, you basically have one foot out of the door, and that most of the time, and 99.9% of the time, when a goalkeeper asks their club to get a DP contract in order to stay with the club, they usually say no. And I thought maybe with Vita Monona going back to Europe, and probably maybe going back to Reading, which is the team that currently have his rights, he might be a regular starter with this team, and that he could get an attractive deal to other not MLS club, but other European club. Well, it turns out that wasn't the case. And instead, he decided to play a team that I don't think a lot of people have heard of in the Danish Superliga. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a shame, the fact that he was hoping that he can go back to Europe to get a bigger move. And it turns out now he's going to be playing with a team that nobody has ever heard of. But that being said, I wish him the best of luck. And I certainly want to thank Vita Monona and his service at Minnesota. I mean, it's going to be really hard for Minnesota to try to replace him. And I know we have Tyler Miller as the guy to replace Vita Monona, but it's going to be hard for Tyler Miller to replicate what Vita Monona has done. And, he was one of the most important player in that run to the playoffs that Minnesota had last season. TFC reacquired Quinton Westberg on a new deal. So, speaking of goalkeeper, while Minnesota wasn't able to reacquire their goalkeeper from last season, TFC is able to do. And I think it's pretty much easier for TFC to reacquire their goalkeeper since they have the rights to them. And this was also a no-brainer, the fact that TFC decided to require Quinton Westberg, who last year when he stepped in for Alex Bono, a lot of people thought that he was just going to be a backup, but he started to play very well and got that starting role, and the rest is history. I mean, he was probably, in my mind, one of the most underrated goalkeeper in this league, and it's good the fact that TFC is able to secure him on a new deal, and that they're going to get a goalkeeper that, again, I think he's one of the most underrated goalkeeper in the league, and a goalkeeper that you probably have not heard of him before, but you will probably now hear of him if he ends up to be one of the best and could be a top 10 level kind of goalkeeper in this league. The Chicago Fire is rumored to pay Rapid Vienna $2.7 million for a 22-year-old center mid Dejan L. And the reason why I only said the first letter of his last name is that I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. Like, anytime when you have last name that have kind of like weird letters, or mostly kind of Eastern European kind of name. I know even though he's Austrian, he actually have some Croatian and Bosnian ancestry. And anytime when you have these kind of weird Eastern European Baltic last name, yeah, I'm not even going to try to attempt, and I'm gonna just wait until if he does come to Chicago, and that I'm just gonna wait until how their broadcaster and announcer is going to pronounce their name, and then that's when I'll try to attempt to pronounce his last name. But in terms of this rumor itself, I definitely can see this happen because, one, it's an Eastern European player, which means that it seemed like Chicago, they just love to get some Baltic kind of players, or they love to get players from the Baltic, and they love to get Eastern European player to construct their attacking option. And two, from what I heard, he is a very promising Austrian player that currently plays with Rapid Vienna, made a couple of appearances in the Europa League also. So, yeah, it could be a good deal for the Chicago Fire. And for $2.7 million, it's not really that much for them to pay, even though they're going to have to potentially make him a DP player if he does come to this league. Nashville is reporting closing in West Ham defender Winston Reid. Actually, this kind of doesn't make sense. It should say report in closing the deal to get West Ham defender in Winston Reid. But, I'm obviously tired. It's 10:23 right now on a Saturday. I've been out pretty much the whole day. So you can probably at least excuse the fact that I kind of messed up a little bit in terms of how I wrote this news. But going back to this, Nashville, of course, they are looking to try to get West Ham defender Winston Reid. And I guess the only way this deal can happen is that if West Ham is able to get Aaron Long, and that I feel like the reason why they were looking to get Aaron Long is because they know that if they get him, they're most likely going to sell Winston Reid to someone else. Well, in case if the Red Bulls does sell Aaron Long to West Ham, and that West Ham, of course, decides to sell Winston Reid, most likely this rumor will come true and Nashville will get him. And if they do get him, it's a good, decent defender, and that he's been a regular starter for West Ham for the past couple of seasons. He's been having a couple of injury issue for the last couple of seasons. Well, last season he's been kind of spending more time on the IR than actually on the pitch, but it's still a very decent option for Nashville. Although, as much as it's a decent option on their defensive end, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it again. They need some attacking option. And if they do not get some more attacking option, they are going to really look like the FC Cincinnati heading into this season. Although, despite the fact that they haven't signed any big name kind of player, I don't think that is kind of like the main problem that they have to deal with. Because right now, I feel like the biggest problem Nashville have to deal with is their new MLS Stadium. Because apparently, a couple of days ago, there was a news talk about how Nashville and the city mayor is having issue in terms of agreement to build the new MLS Stadium, and that the city mayor refused to demolish, I think, part of the fairgrounds, that Nashville is going to build their stadium on top of it. Nashville, of course, recently threw in $19 million in order to get this deal done, but I haven't heard any news back heard any news back from either the team or their city mayor saying that the agreement has been reached. So, yeah, not only the fact that Nashville is having problem attracting big name players, and not only the fact that they also been having problem in terms of attracting fans, because they only have 6,000 people having season tickets with the team, which is around the same number that the Chicago Fire has this season, and is one of the lowest total amount of season ticket heading into this season that has been sold. They now have problem with their new stadium. And I think, I'm not quite sure if Darren Gabbert said this, but I did found this on Reddit, which, it's it's always kind of, you always take kind of a rule of thumb in terms of whether or not if you trust some of the sources that the Reddit post puts in. But I did hear that Darren Gabbert kind of said that, well, if we were to do a do-over in terms of the expansion, and if we look at Nashville's situation in this do-over, we will absolutely not give them an MLS team. And I don't blame him, because Nashville right now, they're having problem with their stadium situation. They don't really have a lot of fans seems to be interest with the team, and also they look like they're going to be the second coming of FC Cincinnati in their expansion year. So yeah, things are not looking well for this expansion team, and you just hope that eventually this whole deal would be figured out, and that, you know, let's just hope that this won't be a situation where it could be similar to the NYCFC situation, where, you know, NYCFC says that they were going to get a stadium done and that they were going to just play at Yankee Stadium for the temporary time, and it just continues to drag on, and to this day NYCFC still doesn't have a stadium, and they're still playing at Yankee Stadium. And that, let's just hope it's not the case with Nashville having to play at that stadium that the Tennessee Titans are playing in, and that they won't actually going to be getting that new MLS stadium. Also, did I just put building the new MLS team right here? Again, it's Saturday evening, it's late, I'm absolutely exhausted, and here's another error that I made here on the board. But finally, to end this news of the week, the CBA agreement. So I know a lot of people were very anxious about the CBA agreement and whether or not if it was going to reach yesterday, because that was supposed to be where the deadline was reached. Well, it turns out MLS decided that they're going to extend that deadline to February 7th. So that means that as much as we're anxious of what this CBA agreement is going to be look like and what this new deal is going to highlight, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. And I heard that right now they're getting very close in terms of finishing negotiating this deal, and once they did finish negotiating this new CBA agreement and extending this deal, I of course will make a video about that and talk about what has changed, because right now this agreement is pretty big and it has a lot of impact in terms of whether or not if the TAM rule is going to be different, and how the salary cap is going to look, and that what's going to be like the new salary cap. I mean, there's no doubt the salary cap is going to increase once again under this new CBA, but how much it's going to increase, and whether or not if we're actually even going to have DP stuff, because there's been a lot of talk of what's going to happen with the future of DP, whether or not if it's going to be still exist, or whether or not if the DP rule has there's an adjustment in the DP rule where you can only sign like young DP and a specific DP signing that you are going to make. So yeah, excited to see what's going to be this agreement in February 7th, and I just hope that they don't just extend this again to February 14 and just keep extending this, because yes, if they keep extending this, that does make me very nervous about whether or not if things are going to change, and whether or not if there is actually some serious problems with the Player Association and MLS not really agreeing on what is going to happen in this league and what's best for this league moving forward. But either way, hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. As usual, let me know in the comments below what do you think about the news I talked about in this video, and if there's any news that I missed, which I think I have missed a couple of news, but since there was so many news that I have to talk about, I did have to leave a couple of them out that I didn't think was crucial to talk about. But if you feel like there are some of those news, and especially the one that I left out, that you think it's crucial for me to talk about, you can always let me know in the comments below, and I'll try my best to reply on that. But either way, hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys next time.